Commander Vex 9 tapped his 4 claws against the metallic console, creating a rhythm that somehow managed to sound both bored and irritated. Another day, another species to intimidate into submission. The Galactic Enforcement Division had been doing this dance for centuries now, and honestly, it was getting predictable. "Sir, we have visual confirmation of the human vessel," announced Lieutenant Crix, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone who'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "Well, it's smaller than expected." Vex 9 swiveled his massive head toward the viewing screen, his 6 eyes focusing on what could generously be called a ship. It looked like someone had welded scrap metal together during a particularly bad hangover. Paint was peeling off in chunks, one of the engines was smoking slightly, and there appeared to be actual duct tape holding part of the hull together. "That thing actually flies?" Vex 9 asked, genuinely curious. In his 300 years of military service, he'd never seen anything quite so pathetic. "Apparently so, sir. Though I'm not entirely sure how." The human ship drifted closer to their enforcement cruiser, the inevitable Doom, which was roughly the size of a small moon and bristled with enough weaponry to level a continent. The contrast was almost comical. Almost. "Open a communication channel," Vex 9 ordered, straightening his ceremonial battle armor. "Time to put on the show." The humans were new to the galactic community, which meant they probably hadn't heard about the Enforcement Division's reputation yet. This should be quick. The screen flickered, and suddenly they were face to face with, well, a human. Vex 9 had seen the intelligence reports, but seeing one in person was different. The creature looked so remarkably ordinary. 2 eyes, 1 nose, 1 mouth, arranged in what the reports called a typical mammalian configuration. No natural weapons, no armored hide, no venomous glands. How had these things even survived long enough to develop space travel? "Greetings, human vessel," Vex 9 began, his voice dropping to the intimidating bass register that had made lesser species wet themselves in fear. "I am Commander Vex 9 of the Galactic Enforcement Division. You have entered restricted space. Prepare to be boarded for inspection." The human on the screen blinked. Once, twice. Then did something that made Vex 9's blood run cold. The human smiled. "Well, hello there, big guy," the human said, and his voice was so casual it was almost offensive. "Name's Jake Martinez. Nice ship you got there. Compensating for something?" Lieutenant Crix made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Vex 9 shot her a look that could have melted titanium. "You dare mock the inevitable doom?" Vex 9 roared, his voice amplifying through the ship's speakers. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with, human? Well, based on the whole massive ship covered in weapons thing and the prepare to be boarded speech, I'm gonna guess you're not the galactic welcome wagon," Martinez replied, leaning back in what appeared to be a chair held together with hope and more duct tape. "Let me take a wild stab in the dark here. You're some kind of space bully who goes around threatening smaller ships until they give you their lunch money?" Vex 9's 4 nostrils flared. Space bully? Space bully? The Enforcement Division had brought order to 17 sectors. They'd pacified the warrior clans of Drakmor. They'd made the savage Zephyrians build schools instead of gladiator pits. And this hairless monkey was calling them bullies? "We are the instrument of galactic law," Vex 9 thundered. "We bring order to the lawless. Yeah, I've heard this speech before," Martinez interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "Different planet, same story. Big fish eats little fish. Circle of life. Blah, blah, blah. Here's the thing, though, Commander Vex. Can I call you Vex?" I'm going to call you Vex. You will address me by my full title or... Right. So here's the deal, Vex. You seem to be under the impression that I'm going to roll over and play dead because you've got a big ship and probably some kind of tractor beam situation going on. But see, there's something you might not know about humans. Martinez leaned forward, and for just a moment, his casual demeanor shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes, something that made Vex 9's survival instincts start screaming warnings. We're really, really bad at knowing when to quit. Before Vex 9 could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the inevitable doom. Red warning lights bathed the bridge in an ominous glow as Tactical Officer Grex shouted from his station. "Sir, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations from the human vessel. It's charging weapons." Vex 9 spun toward the screen showing Martinez's ship. The pathetic little rust bucket was indeed powering up something, though what exactly remained unclear. The energy readings were all over the place, completely inconsistent with any known weapon system. "What kind of weapons?" Vex 9 demanded. "Unknown, sir. The energy signature is unlike anything in our database." Martinez's voice drifted through the comm system, still maddeningly casual. "You know, Vex, I probably should mention something. This little ship of mine? It used to belong to my great-grandfather. He was what you might call an eccentric inventor. Built all sorts of interesting toys." "Human, power down your weapons immediately, or we will consider this an act of aggression," Vex 9 barked. "Weapons?" Martinez sounded genuinely puzzled. "Oh, you mean the quantum flux redistributor? That's not a weapon. Well, not technically." "Then what is it?" Lieutenant Crix asked before she could stop herself. "It's more like a reality adjustment tool. See, my great-grandpa had this theory that space-time was more flexible than most people thought. He figured if you hit it with just the right frequency, at just the right angle, you could make some pretty interesting things happen." The energy readings from the human ship spiked again, and suddenly the inevitable doom's sensors went completely haywire. Every screen on the bridge started displaying impossible readings. According to their instruments, Martinez's ship was simultaneously in 17 different locations, moving at negative velocity, and apparently existed in the past, present, and future all at once. "What in the seven hells is happening?" Vex 9 roared. "Reality adjustment," Martinez said cheerfully. "Don't worry, it's completely harmless, mostly. There was that one incident with the space pirates, but honestly, they had it coming." "What happened to the space pirates?" Grex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, let's just say they discovered that threatening a human tends to have unexpected consequences. They're fine, by the way, relatively speaking. I mean, they're still pirates, but now they're pirates who exist in a state of quantum uncertainty. They can't decide if they want to rob you or apologize and offer you tea." Vex 9 felt a chill run down his spine. In all his years of service, he'd never encountered anything quite like this. The humans were supposed to be weak, newly spacefaring, easy to intimidate. The intelligence reports had been very clear on that point. "You're bluffing," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Am I?" Martinez asked. "Tell you what, Vex. Why don't you run a deep scan on my ship's weapon systems? Take a real good look at what you're dealing with." Grex's claws flew over his console, initiating the most comprehensive scan the inevitable doom was capable of. The results came back almost immediately, and they were problematic. "Sir," Grex said slowly, "according to our scans, the human ship doesn't have any weapons." "What?" "No weapons at all, sir. No plasma cannons, no missile tubes, no energy projectors, nothing. Just that quantum device and, what appears to be a rather impressive collection of tools for ship maintenance. Vex 9 stared at the screen in confusion. Then, what are you threatening us with? Martinez's smile widened. Who said anything about threatening? I'm just making conversation. Though I should probably mention that the quantum flux redistributor does have one interesting side effect. It tends to make really big ships with really big egos develop sudden cases of existential uncertainty. Existential uncertainty? Yeah, suddenly questioning whether you actually exist, whether reality is real, that sort of thing. The bigger the ego, the worse the effect tends to be. Something about the quantum resonance frequency interfering with overinflated self-importance. As if on cue, the lights on the bridge began to flicker. Then the gravity generators started hiccuping. Then several crew members started looking around with the confused expressions of people who'd just walked into a room and forgotten why they'd come there. What was I doing? Lieutenant Crix asked, staring at her console as if she'd never seen it before. I'm not sure, Grex replied, his voice distant and confused. Something about enforcement? But enforcing what? And why? Vex 9 felt a creeping doubt beginning to gnaw at the edges of his consciousness. Why was he here? What was the point of the enforcement division? Come to think of it, what was the point of anything? Now that's interesting, Martinez observed from the screen. Usually takes longer than this for the effect to kick in. You boys must have some really impressive egos. Turn it off, Vex 9 demanded, though he was no longer entirely sure why he cared. Can't do that, Vex. Once it's started, the quantum flux redistributor has to run its full cycle. Don't worry, though, the effect is only temporary. Well, mostly temporary. The space pirates I mentioned earlier still send me holiday cards asking if I'm real. The existential crisis was spreading through the bridge crew like a particularly philosophical plague. Half the tactical team was staring at their hands as if they'd never seen fingers before. The navigation officer was having what appeared to be a deep spiritual awakening about the nature of stellar cartography. How long does this last? Vex 9 asked, clinging to his command chair as reality continued to feel increasingly negotiable. Depends on how attached you are to your current worldview, Martinez said. Could be minutes, could be hours, could be forever if you're really stubborn about it. The quantum field tends to adjust itself based on how much ego it has to work through. The bridge of the inevitable doom had descended into something resembling a cosmic support group. Crew members were sharing deep thoughts about the meaning of their existence, questioning the nature of authority, and in one case, composing what sounded like very bad poetry about the loneliness of space. This is insane, Vex 9 muttered. That's kind of the point, Martinez replied. See, humans learned a long time ago that the universe is a weird place full of weird things that don't make sense. So we stopped trying to make sense of it and started making our own sense instead. Turns out, reality is a lot more flexible when you don't take it too seriously. Are you telling me that your entire species is insane? Functionally speaking, pretty much. We call it creativity. But yeah, we're all a little bit crazy. Has to be, really. How else would we have survived this long? I mean, look at us. We're basically hairless apes who figured out how to throw rocks really, really hard and somehow convinced ourselves that this qualified us for space travel. Despite everything, Vex 9 found himself almost admiring the human's casual admission of his species' apparent insanity. There was something refreshingly honest about it. So, what happens now? He asked. Well, that's up to you, Vex. You can keep trying to be the big scary enforcer, in which case my great-grandpa's little reality adjustment tool is going to keep doing its thing until you're too busy questioning the nature of existence to remember why you wanted to board my ship in the first place." Vex 9 looked around his bridge, where his crew was still dealing with various levels of cosmic bewilderment. Lieutenant Crix was having what appeared to be a religious experience with a coffee cup. This was not how enforcement operations were supposed to go. "Or," he prompted, "or you could try treating me like an equal instead of prey, and we could have a nice normal conversation about whatever it is you actually want. Your choice." The quantum flux redistributor hummed in the background, a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Vex 9 realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue with the traditional enforcement approach and probably spend the next several hours explaining to his superiors why his crew had developed sudden interests in philosophy and interpretive dance. Or he could try something completely unprecedented in the history of the Enforcement Division. He could try being reasonable. "Very well, Jake Martinez," Vex 9 said, surprised by how natural the human's name felt on his tongue. "What exactly are you doing in restricted space?" "Now see, that's a much better question," Martinez said, his smile returning to its earlier casual warmth. "And the answer is pretty simple. I'm lost." "Lost?" "Completely. Totally, thoroughly lost. My navigation system decided to take a permanent vacation about 3 sectors back, and I've been flying blind ever since. I saw your big shiny ship and figured maybe you folks could point me in the right direction." Vex 9 blinked all 6 eyes in succession. "You mean this entire situation occurred because you needed directions?" "Pretty much, yeah. Though I have to say, your hospitality could use some work. 'Prepare to be boarded' isn't exactly the warmest greeting I've ever received." The absurdity of the situation was beginning to penetrate even the quantum-induced fog of existential uncertainty that had settled over the bridge. They'd brought out the full intimidation protocol, activated battle stations, and prepared for what they assumed would be another routine enforcement action, all because a lost human had wandered into their patrol zone looking for directions. "You could have simply requested assistance," Vex 9 pointed out. "I tried that with the last 3 ships I encountered," Martinez replied. 2 of them shot at me without warning, and the 3rd one tried to demand tribute for safe passage through what they called their sovereign territory. So, forgive me if I've developed a slightly suspicious attitude toward large, heavily armed vessels." Lieutenant Crix, who was slowly emerging from her quantum-induced philosophical crisis, looked up from her console. "Sir, he's not wrong about the other ships. Sensors show evidence of recent weapons fire on his hull, and there are traces of what appears to be a failed tractor beam lock." Vex 9 studied the human ship more carefully. Now that he was looking for it, he could indeed see the scorch marks and hull damage that spoke of recent hostilities. The duct tape he'd initially dismissed as primitive maintenance was actually emergency hull repairs. "You've been attacked," he said, more statement than question. 3 times in the last 2 days, Martinez confirmed. "Apparently, being human makes me either a target or a curiosity, depending on who I run into. Can't say I'm particularly fond of either option." The quantum flux redistributor's hum was finally beginning to fade, and with it, the worst effects of the existential uncertainty. Crew members were slowly returning to their stations, though several still looked like they were nursing philosophical hangovers. "Where are you trying to go?" Vex 9 asked. "Station Kepler 442b. I've got a cargo delivery that's already 3 days overdue, and my client is the type who expresses displeasure through violence. Well, more violence than usual, anyway." "Kepler 442b is 4 sectors from here," Lieutenant Crix said, consulting her charts. "You've been traveling in completely the wrong direction." Martinez sighed and rubbed what Vex 9 assumed was his forehead. "Figures. I knew I should have taken that left turn at Alpha Centauri. If you're simply lost, why didn't you power down when we issued our initial demand? Vex 9 asked. Because in my experience, showing weakness to bullies just makes them bully harder. And let's be honest here, Vex. That whole prepare to be boarded routine of yours? Classic bully behavior. You saw a smaller ship, assumed I'd roll over, and decided to flex your muscles. Vex 9 found himself in the uncomfortable position of realizing that the human was absolutely right. The Enforcement Division's entire operational doctrine was based on intimidation and overwhelming force. They'd grown so accustomed to dealing with species that submitted immediately to their authority that they'd never really considered what would happen if they encountered someone who simply refused to be intimidated. So, what exactly is this quantum flux redistributor of yours? He asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to change the subject. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Great-grandpa was pretty secretive about how it actually works. All I know is that it does something to local space-time that makes really aggressive people start questioning their life choices. He called it the Ego Adjustment Protocol. And you just carry this around? As a matter of course. Well, I didn't exactly have a choice. It's built into the ship's core systems. Can't remove it without basically scrapping the whole vessel. Besides, it's come in handy more times than I can count. You'd be amazed how many conflicts you can resolve just by making people think about why they're fighting in the first place. The bridge had finally returned to something resembling normal operations, though Vex 9 noticed that several of his crew members were still casting thoughtful glances at their instruments, as if seeing them for the first time. "Commander," Grex said from the tactical station, "I hate to interrupt, but we're receiving an urgent priority message from Command." Vex 9's mood immediately darkened. Priority messages from Command were never good news. "Put it through." The screen shifted to show the angular, intimidating features of Admiral Kormax, Supreme Commander of the Enforcement Division, and generally acknowledged to be one of the most ruthlessly efficient military minds in the galaxy. "Commander Vex 9, Admiral Kormax began without preamble. Explain to me why you've been sitting in the same position for the past hour instead of completing your patrol route." "Sir, we encountered a human vessel in restricted space and initiated standard enforcement protocols," Vex 9 replied, falling back on military formality. "A single human ship?" Admiral Kormax's expression suggested that he found this explanation less than satisfactory. "You've been dealing with one primitive vessel for an entire hour?" "The situation was complex, sir." "Complex?" The Admiral's voice carried enough ice to freeze a small sun. "Commander, I am looking at tactical reports that suggest your entire crew experienced some kind of collective psychological breakdown. Your bridge officers filed incident reports claiming temporary amnesia, existential crisis, and in one case, a sudden urge to write poetry. Would you care to explain this to me?" Vex 9 glanced at Martinez, who was watching the conversation with obvious interest. The human caught his look and shrugged, as if to say, "Your call." "Sir, the human vessel was equipped with some form of psychological warfare device. It induced a temporary state of mental confusion among the crew." "Psychological warfare?" Admiral Kormax leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. "What kind of device?" "Unknown technology, sir. The human claims it's something called a quantum flux redistributor." "I see. And where is this human vessel now?" "Still here, sir. The situation is ongoing." Admiral Kormax studied Vex 9's face with the calculating expression of someone who'd spent centuries reading between the lines of military reports. "Commander, patch me through to this human. I want to speak with them directly." Oh, this was going to be interesting. Vex 9 exchanged glances with Martinez, who somehow managed to look both amused and resigned at the same time. The human mouthed the words, "This should be fun," before settling back into his duct-tape chair with the air of someone preparing to watch an entertaining disaster unfold. "Patching you through now, Admiral," Vex 9 said, wondering if this was how his military career was going to end. The screen split, showing both Admiral Kormax and Jake Martinez side by side. The contrast was stark. On one side, the most feared military commander in 7 sectors, his scarred face a testament to countless battles. On the other, a human who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, but was too polite to just hang up. Admiral Kormax studied Martinez with the intensity of a predator sizing up potential prey. Martinez returned the stare with casual interest, as if he were examining an unusual specimen in a zoo. "So," Admiral Kormax said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you're the human who's been causing problems for my commander." "Problems?" Martinez raised an eyebrow. "I asked for directions and got threatened with boarding action. If that's how your boys usually handle requests for help, I'd hate to see what happens when someone actually causes problems." The Admiral's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "You deployed an unknown weapon against an Enforcement Division vessel." "Weapon?" Martinez laughed, and the sound was genuinely amused. "Admiral, with respect, if I'd deployed a weapon, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Your ship would be scattered across 3 different dimensions by now." "Explain." Martinez leaned forward slightly, and again Vex 9 caught that brief glimpse of something dangerous lurking beneath the human's casual exterior. "The quantum flux redistributor isn't a weapon, Admiral. It's a reality check. See, my great-grandfather was a philosopher as much as an inventor. He figured that most conflicts in the universe happened because beings got so caught up in their own importance that they forgot to question whether their actions actually made sense. And your device, what? Makes them question reality? It makes them question everything. Their assumptions, their beliefs, their fundamental understanding of how the universe works. Most beings can't handle that level of cognitive dissonance, so they experience what you might call an ego crash." Admiral Kormax was quiet for a long moment, his calculating gaze never leaving Martinez. "And humans are immune to this effect." "Not immune, no. But humans spend most of our time questioning reality anyway. We're naturally comfortable with uncertainty, chaos, and the general sense that nothing really makes sense. So when the quantum field starts messing with our cognitive processes, we just roll with it." Fascinating. The Admiral's tone suggested he found it anything but fascinating. "Tell me, human, what do you know about the Enforcement Division's mission? You fly around in big scary ships, intimidating smaller civilizations until they do whatever it is you want them to do. Pretty standard galactic bully behavior, really." The bridge of the inevitable doom went dead silent. Even the background hum of the ship's systems seemed to quiet down. Nobody talked to Admiral Kormax like that, and lived to tell about it. "Bully behavior?" the Admiral repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "Well, yeah. I mean, what would you call it? You see someone weaker than you threaten them with overwhelming force, and you expect them to submit. That's pretty much the definition of bullying. We maintain order in the galaxy." "According to who?" The question hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. Admiral Kormax's expression had gone completely neutral, which Vex 9 knew from experience was far more dangerous than obvious anger. "According to the Galactic Council," the Admiral said finally. "Ah, yes, the Galactic Council. Let me guess. They're made up of the biggest, strongest species in the galaxy, and they've decided that everyone else needs to be kept in line for their own good? The Council represents the interests of all civilized species." "Uh-huh. And who decides what counts as civilized?" Vex 9 watched his commanding officer's face and realized that Martinez had just done something unprecedented. He'd managed to make Admiral Kormax actually think about the questions he was asking instead of simply dismissing them. "The Council has established clear criteria for what constitutes acceptable behavior according to their standards," Martinez interrupted. "Right. So basically, you're the enforcement arm of a government that nobody actually voted for, imposing laws that they wrote to benefit themselves. How is that different from a protection racket?" "We prevent wars. We stop conflicts before they can escalate into system-wide devastation. By threatening anyone who looks like they might cause trouble. By maintaining the peace." "Whose peace?" The Admiral fell silent again, and Vex 9 realized that something fundamental was shifting in the conversation. Martinez wasn't just asking rhetorical questions. He was systematically dismantling the philosophical foundation that the entire Enforcement Division was built on. "You know what's funny?" Martinez continued, apparently oblivious to the increasingly tense silence. "Every bully I've ever met has had the same justification. They're maintaining order. They're preventing chaos. They're protecting people from themselves. But somehow, the order they maintain always seems to benefit them more than anyone else." "Are you suggesting that the Enforcement Division is corrupt?" "I'm suggesting that any organization that exists primarily to threaten people into compliance is going to attract individuals who enjoy threatening people. And once you've got a bunch of people whose job is being scary, they're going to find reasons to keep being scary, whether those reasons are valid or not." Lieutenant Crix made a small sound that might have been agreement. Vex 9 shot her a warning look, but realized that he wasn't entirely sure why. Was she wrong? "The galaxy is a dangerous place," Admiral Kormax said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Without order, without enforcement, civilizations would tear themselves apart. Maybe. Or maybe they'd figure out how to get along on their own. Kind of hard to know when you never give them the chance." "And what would you have us do? Disband the Enforcement Division? Let anarchy reign?" "I'd have you try asking people what they actually want instead of telling them what you think they need. But that's just me. I'm probably just some primitive human who doesn't understand the complexities of galactic politics." The sarcasm in Martinez's voice was so thick you could have cut it with a plasma torch. But underneath it was something else. Something that sounded almost like disappointment. "You know what the really sad part is?" Martinez continued. "You people have all this technology, all this power, all these resources. You could probably solve half the galaxy's problems if you actually tried. Instead, you spend your time flying around in ships the size of cities, making sure nobody steps out of line. Maintaining order requires wisdom, not firepower. It requires understanding, not intimidation. It requires leaders who actually care about the people they're leading, not just maintaining their own authority." Admiral Kormax was staring at Martinez with an expression that Vex 9 had never seen before. It wasn't anger, exactly. It wasn't confusion, either. It was something deeper, more troubling. "You speak as though you have experience with leadership," the Admiral said slowly. "I've been around," Martinez replied with a shrug. "Seen a lot of different approaches to governance. Some work better than others. And humans? How do humans handle leadership? Badly, mostly. We argue constantly, can't agree on anything, and about half our leaders are probably clinically insane. But at least we get to choose which crazy people we want to disappoint us. Despite everything, Vex 9 found himself almost smiling at that. There was something refreshing about Martinez's casual admission of his species' flaws. Choice, Admiral Kormax repeated thoughtfully. Radical concept, I know. The idea that beings might actually be capable of making decisions about their own lives without someone bigger and scarier telling them what to do. And if they make the wrong choices, then they learn from their mistakes. That's how growth works, Admiral. You can't learn wisdom from someone else's experiences. You have to earn it yourself. The quantum flux redistributor was still humming quietly in the background, and Vex 9 realized that its effects weren't entirely gone. The existential questions that had plagued his crew earlier were still there, just quieter now. More subtle, but no less persistent. Commander Vex 9, Admiral Kormax said suddenly, what is your honest assessment of this encounter? The question caught Vex 9 off guard. In 30 years of service, Admiral Kormax had never asked for his honest assessment of anything. Orders, reports, tactical analysis, yes. But honest assessment was something different entirely. Sir, the human poses no direct threat to our operations, but his presence is disruptive to normal enforcement procedures. Disruptive how? Vex 9 glanced at Martinez, who gave him an encouraging nod. He asks questions that we're not prepared to answer, sir. Such as? Such as why we're here, what we're actually accomplishing, whether the methods we use are justified by the results we achieve. And what are your thoughts on these questions? This was dangerous territory. Questioning the mission was tantamount to insubordination. But something about the Admiral's tone suggested that he genuinely wanted an answer. I think we've become very good at following orders without examining whether those orders make sense. We've become efficient at enforcement without considering whether enforcement is actually solving the problems we're supposed to be addressing. The bridge was so quiet that Vex 9 could hear his own heartbeat. Lieutenant Crix was staring at him with something approaching admiration. Grex looked terrified, but nodded slightly in agreement. Interesting, Admiral Kormax said. Mr. Martinez, you've managed to do something that decades of military discipline haven't accomplished. You've made my officers think. Is that a bad thing? Martinez asked. That remains to be seen. Tell me, what would you do if you were in my position? Honestly, I'd probably start by asking the people you're supposed to be protecting whether they actually want your protection. Might be surprised by the answers you get. And if they say no, then maybe you find something better to do with your time. Universe is a big place. Lot of problems that could use solving by people with your resources and capabilities. Admiral Kormax was quiet for a long time, staring at something beyond the camera's view. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Thoughtful rather than commanding. Mr. Martinez, you mentioned that you're lost. Very lost, yeah. Commander Vex 9. Provide Mr. Martinez with accurate navigation data to reach Station Kepler 442B. Full escort, if necessary. Sir? Vex 9 blinked in surprise. You heard me, Commander. And Mr. Martinez? Yeah? When you reach your destination, I want you to send me a detailed report on the conditions you encounter there. The real conditions, not what local authorities might want us to believe. Any particular reason? Let's call it reconnaissance. If we're going to continue operating in this sector, I want to know what the beings we're supposedly protecting actually think about our presence." Martinez studied the Admiral's face with obvious curiosity. "And if they're not happy with the current arrangement? Then perhaps it's time for a change in policy." The implications of that statement hit the bridge crew like a shockwave. Policy changes in the Enforcement Division were unheard of. The organization had operated under the same basics, principles for over 2 centuries. "Admiral," Vex-9 said carefully, "are you suggesting that we alter our operational procedures?" "I'm suggesting that we examine whether our operational procedures are actually achieving their stated objectives. There's a difference." "And if they're not?" "Then we adapt. Evolution, Commander. It's a universal constant. Species that fail to adapt to changing conditions become extinct." Martinez was grinning now, and Vex-9 realized that the human had somehow managed to plant a seed of doubt in the mind of the most rigid military commander in the galaxy. "Well," Martinez said, "this has been educational. Admiral, Commander, it's been a pleasure doing business with you. Try not to intimidate too many lost travelers on your way home." "Mr. Martinez," Admiral Kormax said, "one final question. That device of yours, the quantum flux redistributor, how many ships are equipped with similar technology?" "Just this one, as far as I know. Great-grandpa was pretty secretive about his work. Though, knowing him, he probably built a few backup devices just in case." "And are there other humans who might have access to similar reality adjustment tools?" Martinez's grin widened. "Admiral, you have no idea what humans are capable of when we put our minds to it. The quantum flux redistributor is probably one of the tamer inventions in Great-Grandpa's workshop." With that thoroughly ominous statement, Martinez cut the communication link. His ship's engines flared to life, and the battered little vessel began moving toward the coordinates that Lieutenant Crix had transmitted. Admiral Kormax remained on screen for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. "Commander Vex-9." "Yes, sir?" "File a complete report on this encounter. Include your personal observations and recommendations. I want to know everything about how that human managed to accomplish what he did." "And then, sir?" "Then we start asking ourselves some very difficult questions about what we're actually doing out here." The communication ended, leaving the bridge of the inevitable doom in stunned silence. Vex-9 looked around at his crew, all of whom were staring at their stations with the bewildered expressions of people who just watched their entire worldview get casually dismantled by a lost human with duct tape on his ship. "Sir," Lieutenant Crix said hesitantly, "what do we do now?" Vex-9 considered the question. Standard protocol would be to resume patrol, file the incident report, and continue with business as usual. But somehow, business as usual didn't feel quite as usual anymore. "We follow our orders," he said finally. "We provide escort to Mr. Martinez. And then—" He paused, watching the human ship disappear into hyperspace. "Then we start asking some very good questions." As the inevitable doom changed course to follow Martinez's vessel, Vex-9 found himself wondering what other surprises humanity might have in store for the galaxy. If one lost human with a philosophical grandfather and a reality-adjusting device could turn the Enforcement Division's fundamental assumptions upside down in the space of an hour, what could the entire human species accomplish? It was a sobering thought, and for the first time in his career, Vex-9 found himself looking forward to finding out the answer. 3 weeks later, Admiral Kormax stood in his office reading Martinez's report on conditions at Station Kepler, 442b. The document was unlike anything he'd ever received from a field operative. It was honest, detailed, and painted a picture of a galactic community that was far more complex and nuanced than Enforcement Division protocols had ever acknowledged. More importantly, it raised questions that Admiral Kormax was finally ready to start answering. The human had been right about one thing. The universe was a big place, with a lot of problems that could use solving. Maybe it was time for the Enforcement Division to stop being part of the problem and start being part of the solution. After all, as Martinez had so eloquently put it, evolution was a universal constant, and species that failed to adapt became extinct. The Admiral smiled grimly and began drafting new operational guidelines. It was time for some evolution of their own. The day the aliens realized that threatening a human was the same as signing their own death warrant turned out to be the day they also realized that maybe, just maybe, there were better ways to live.